In this video, we are going to discuss on the process 5.1 plan scope management. This is the first process out of 6 processes under project scope management knowledge area. This is also the second process out of 24 processes under planning process group. Plan scope management 5.1. This process is focused on creating scope management plan which documents how the project and product scope will be defined, how the scope will be developed, how the scope will be monitored, how the scope will be controlled, and how the project or the product scope is validated. So this document, scope management plan, will be capturing all this information, and this will be the output of this process plan scope management. The benefit of having this process is this process provides guidance and direction on how the scope will be managed throughout the project. And this process can be either performed in the beginning, as a one-time activity, or it can also be done as over a period of time during the project life cycle at predetermined points. What are the inputs for this process? The first input for this process is project charter, which is an output of process 4.1, which captures the project purpose, high-level project description, assumptions, constraints, and high-level requirements which the project is intended to deliver. Second input is project management plan, which is an output of process 4.2, and especially the components under project management plan which are all important for critical for the execution of this process are quality management plan, project lifecycle description, and development approach. So quality management plan, which is an output of process 8.1, which typically have information about the way the project and product scope will be managed with respect to the organizational quality policy and methodologies and standards. The project lifecycle description. Here, the project lifecycle determines the series of phases that a project passes through its inception till the end of the project. So how we have been, how we have described the project lifecycle. That means whether we are going to have the scope defined in the beginning, or it is at a predefined timelines, or it will be a progressive one. So how we are going to accommodate the changes. So the whole entire project life cycle, how it runs with respect to the scope, is also an input for this process. And development approach. So what kind of methodology or the technique, I can call it as a technique, is a methodology we adopt to develop the product or the project outcome. So like we might use Agile methodology, or we might use a Waterfall methodology, or we can use in iterative methods or adaptive methods. Sometimes it is a hybrid of all these things. So like this different or new product development methodology, NTP, okay, sorry, NPD, so new product development. So like this many development methodologies are available. So what is the development approach we are going to have should also be an input for defining or to come out with the scope management. And two more important inputs for this process is enterprise environmental factors and organizational process assets. Enterprise environmental factors, which influence the scope management process. Planning the scope management process includes organization's culture. We should consider what is the culture of the organization, which will have an impact on how the scope will be managed. Infrastructure, so the infrastructure available within the organization. Personal administration, so what are the different administrative policies and the procedures which is guided by multiple factors should also be considered before we plan to scope plan for the scope management. And marketplace conditions, so this is again how the market, each industry, each domain will have some specialization or specialities or uniqueness which we need to be considered while planning to manage the scope. So like if you want to have a short duration project where you need to develop a product, then your how you define the scope will matter most, or your scope management will have an impact on your project success or product success in the market. Sometimes if it is a long term project, if it is running for more than a year or more than years, then what happens, then the scope has to be developed or to be managed in a progressive manner. So all these things has to be considered before we start planning how to manage the scope. Then organizational process assets we need to consider as an input for managing the scope, which includes policies and procedures of the organization, historical information from the past events and past projects, and any best practices or lessons learned repositories. So these are the inputs we need to take before we embark on planning this managing scope of the project. The tools and techniques for this process which can be leveraged, or the first one is expert judgment, second one is data analysis, and third one is meetings. Expert judgment, so we have discussed this in all the processes. So the expert or the subject matter expert should have enough knowledge and wisdom with respect to previous similar projects, some kind of experience with the similar projects during earlier times. And second one is he should have sufficient information about the industry, the discipline and application area of the project. Second tools and techniques is data analysis. So data analysis, multiple data analysis techniques can be used for this process, like alternative analysis, various type of requirement collections, the project elaboration, scope elaboration, project scope elaboration, then the creating the project. So product can be created in multiple ways, validating the scope, scope validation, scope control. All these things has to be evaluated, and there are multiple analysis tools are available. So we can use these tools and techniques for planning for the scope management. The third tool and techniques is meetings. So we know the multiple meetings we can leverage to develop the scope management plan. The typical attendees for this kind of meetings are project manager, project sponsor, team members, stakeholders, sometimes the users, customers, suppliers, vendors, okay, and who all are other responsible for the scope management process and as needed. The output of this process, there are two outputs. One is scope management plan and requirements management plan. The first one, scope management plan, is a part of the project management plan, component of the project management plan, which describes how the scope will be defined, developed, monitored, controlled, and validated, which is also an the the objective of this process. So this scope management plan should include the following information. The first one is process for preparing a project scope statement. So the scope management plan should include how the project scope statement will be prepared and a process for that. Second one, this scope management plan should include the processes uh, for creating the WBS from the project scope statement. So once we have developed the project scope statement through the process, we should also have a process how to develop the work breakdown structure, how to create the work breakdown structure from the project scope statement process. The third one is the scope management plan should include how the scope baselining will be done, approved, and maintained. And the last one is the scope management plan should include the process how the formal project deliverables will be accepted or the acceptance criteria. So to summarize, the output of this process plan scope management should have a scope management plan, a document which will be named as scope management plan, which includes this scope management plan should have four processes. The first process which defines how the project scope statement will be prepared. Second process how the work breakdown structure will be created. The third process how the scope baselining will be developed, approved and maintained. And the last process of how the formal project details will be accepted. So this is the first output of this process. Second output is requirements management plan, which we see in the next slide. The second output from this process plan scope management 5.1 is requirements management plan. Before we develop the scope, we need to get the requirements of the stakeholders. So this plan, requirements management plan, is a part of project management plan which describes how the project and product requirements will be analyzed, documented and managed. So there is a specific practitioner's guide available with PMI by the name Business Analysis for Practitioners, a practice guide 7, which can be referred for this requirements management plan. So some companies or the organizations term it as business analysis plan. So this business analysis plan, the components of this includes how the requirements activities will be planned, tracked and reported. We are going to lay out how we are going to plan the requirements, how the requirements will be tracked and how the requirement will be reported through requirements management plan. This plan, requirements management plan, also includes the activities of configuration management, like how the changes will be initiated, how the change impacts will be analyzed, and how the changes should be traced, how the changes should be tracked, and how the changes will be reported, along with how the authorization levels required for approving these changes. So different techniques can be used, different technologies can be used. So we are going to lay out how this configuration management is handled in this requirements management plan, which is very critical or essential for the projects like in aerospace, defense, with respect to food, banking. So where you need to keep a eye on or a tab on the configuration management, because the products, the outcome of the project will have a long life. The third component of this requirements management plan is requirements prioritization process. So which requirements you are going to prioritize when you have conflicting requirements. So those information should also be planned or captured in requirements management plan. And also metrics that will be used for the requirements and the rationales for using them are also captured in this. Like might be number of functionalities, number of the codes, number of variables, number of different type of data fields or number of data fields in the GUI. So many requirements of the outcome of the project is how you are going to measure them is also decided in requirements management plan, how we are going to develop those metrics. And last one is traceability structure. So how the requirements attributes will be captured on the traceability matrix is also captured in this requirements management plan. So when you have this clarity how the requirements will be managed and how we are going to manage the scope, then we can say this plan scope management process is completed. The next slide shows say the bird's eye view of the inputs, outputs, tools and techniques of this process.